unobserved, but as they ran toward the barns, the king gave vent to something between a groan and a curse, and all about them shone the light, and passed. But had it passed at once, or lingered for just a second? "They didn't see us," said Peter. "I don't think they saw us," said the king, and stared as the light went swooping up the mountainside, hung for a second about a hayrick, and then came pouring back. "In the barn!" cried the king. He bruised his shin against something, and then all three men were inside the huge steel-girdered barn, in which stood the two motor hay lorries that were to take the bombs away. Kurt and Abel, the two brothers of Peter, had brought the lorries thither in daylight. They had the upper half of the loads of hay thrown off, ready to cover the bombs, so soon as the king should show the hiding place. "There's a sort of pit here," said the king. "Don't light another lantern. This key of mine releases a ring." For a time scarcely a word was spoken in the darkness of the barn. There was a sound of a slab being lifted, and then of feet descending a ladder into a pit, then whispering, and then heavy breathing as Kurt came struggling up with the first of the hidden bombs. "We shall do it yet," said the king, and then he gasped, "Curse that light! Why in the name of heaven didn't we shut the barn door?" For the great doors stood wide open and all the empty, lifeless yard outside, and the door and 6 feet of the floor of the barn were in the blue glare of an inquiring searchlight. "Shut the door, Peter," said Pestovitch. "No," cried the king, too late, as Peter went forward into the light. "Don't show yourself!" cried the king. Kurt made a step forward and plucked his brother back. For a time all 5 men stood still. It seemed that light would never go, and then abruptly it was turned off, leaving them blinded. "Now," said the king uneasily, "now shut the door." "Not completely," cried Pestovitch. "Leave a chink for us to go out by." It was hot work shifting those bombs, and the king worked for a time like a common man. Kurt and Abel carried the great things up, and Peter brought them to the carts, and the king and Pestovitch helped him to place them among the hay. They made as little noise as they could. "Shh!" cried the king. "What's that?" But Kurt and Abel did not hear, and came blundering up the ladder with the last of the load. "Shh!" Peter ran forward to them with a whispered remonstrance. Now they were still. The barn door opened a little wider, and against the dim blue light outside they saw the black shape of a man. "Any one here?" he asked, speaking with an Italian accent. The king broke into a cold perspiration. Then Pestovitch answered. "Only a poor farmer loading hay," he said, and picked up a huge hay fork and went forward softly. "You load your hay at a very bad time and in a very bad light," said the man at the door, peering in. "Have you no electric light here?" Then suddenly he turned on an electric torch, and as he did so Pestovitch sprang forward. "Get out of my barn!" he cried, and drove the fork full at the intruder's chest. He had a vague idea that he might stab the man to silence. But the man shouted loudly as the prongs pierced him and drove him backward, and instantly there was a sound of feet running across the yard. "Bombs!" cried the man upon the ground, struggling with the prongs in his hand, and as Pestovitch staggered forward into view with the force of his own thrust, he was shot through the body by one of the 2 newcomers. The man on the ground was hurt badly, but plucky. "Bombs!" he repeated, and struggled up to a kneeling position, and held his electric torch full upon the face of the king. "Shoot them!" he cried, coughing and spitting blood, so that the halo of light round the king's head danced about. For a moment in that shivering circle of light the two men saw the king kneeling up in the cart, and Peter on the barn floor beside him. The old fox looked at them sideways, snared, a white-faced evil thing, and then, with a faltering suicidal heroism, he leant forward over the bomb before him. They fired together and shot him through the head. The upper part of his face seemed to vanish. "Shoot them!" cried the man who had been stabbed. "Shoot them all!" And then his light went out, and he rolled over with a groan at the feet of his comrades. But each carried a light of his own, and in another moment everything in the barn was visible again. They shot Peter even as he held up his hands in sign of surrender. Kurt and Abel at the head of the ladder hesitated for a moment, and then plunged backwards into the pit. "If we don't kill them," said one of the sharpshooters, "they'll blow us to rags. They've gone down that hatchway. Come!" "Here they are. Hands up, I say. Hold your light while I shoot." Section 8. It was still quite dark when his valet and Firmin came together and told the ex-King Egbert that the business was settled. He started up into a sitting position on the side of his bed. "Did he go out?" asked the ex-king. "He is dead," said Firmin. "He was shot." The ex-king reflected. "That's about the best thing that could have happened," he said. "Where are the bombs? In that farmhouse on the opposite hillside? Why, the place is in sight. Let us go. I'll dress. Is there any one in that place, Firmin, to get us a cup of coffee?" Through the hungry twilight of the dawn, the ex-king's automobile carried him to the farmhouse where the last rebel king was lying among his bombs. The rim of the sky flashed, the east grew bright, and the sun was just rising over the hills, when King Egbert reached the farmyard. There he found the hay lorries drawn out from the barn, with the dreadful bombs still packed upon them. A couple of score of aviators held the yard, and outside a few peasants stood in a little group and stared, ignorant as yet of what had happened. Against the stone wall of the farmyard 5 bodies were lying neatly side to side, and Pestovitch had an expression of surprise on his face, and the king was chiefly identifiable by his long white hands and his blond mustache. The wounded aeronaut had been carried down to the inn, and after the ex-king had given directions in what manner the bombs were to be taken to the new special laboratories above Zurich, where they could be unpacked in an atmosphere of chlorine, he turned to those 5 still shapes. Their 5 pairs of feet stuck out with a curious stiff unanimity. "What else was there to do?" he said in answer to some internal protest. "I wonder, Firmin, if there are any more of them?" "Bombs, sir?" asked Firmin. "No, such kings." "The pitiful folly of it," said the ex-king, following his thoughts. "Firmin, as an ex-professor of international politics, I think it falls to you to bury them. There? No, don't put them near the well. People will have to drink from that well. Bury them over there, some way off in the field." End of chapter 3.